Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kat and we're back with the Cyborg Tinkerer by Meg LaTorre. We're moving on to chapter 13 and 14 and ooh, things are getting steamy. In chapter 13, Rora heads out to the pub to meet up with Mazana and Akio, her two buddies. And while people are getting drinks, there is a whooshing noise outside, which could signify a dragon attack. So people are like, oh, what's happening? But no, false alarm. It was no dragon attack, which I would have found a lot more interesting than just going to the pub, but there's still no actual dragon sighting. It does make me wonder though. They've sent all of the dragons to this particular planet, so just the people who live on there have to deal with them. But then the people living there seem to be okay with the occasional dragon attack. They clearly aren't, because in the last chapter, or 2 chapters ago, Gwen went to meet the mistress and she was fully armed. So weapons are clearly a thing, even on this planet, and yet nobody seems to be willing to go up against dragons, even though they occasionally come by and burn down buildings. It doesn't strike me as a very human thing. Because it turns out it's not a dragon attack, and they have no feds or actual police force on the planet. Rora just assumes, oh, it might just be a quick robbery or mugging. And it's like, just because you hear a ship going above the building, why would this automatically mean that somebody is getting robbed or mugged? The ship could just be flying past? I don't know, but we learn that only the mistress has a private guard and everybody is out on their own, it seems. Rora's friends each have a companion with them and are making out in the pub, because that seems like a very adult thing to do. I don't know, I cannot recall being in a pub like in the past 10 years and actually seeing adults make out in public, but who knows. I do have to wonder how big the castle is that everybody lives in, because they have around 300 performers or so. I noted down, so it must have said so in the book somewhere. Yet Rora herself has several rooms just to herself. I do have to wonder, if she has several rooms, does this mean other people have to sleep in bunk beds to fit all of those guys into the castle? Because they also have the guard, they also have servants, it seems. That's a whole lot of people to fit into one castle if some performers take up several rooms, isn't it? Seems like a lot. Mazana teases Rora about having Gwen over for the night, because now that those two are finally talking again, everybody assumes that they instantly moved on to having sex. And Mazana actually manages to embarrass Rora a bit, with a fairly harmless statement, I would say. Is she a good lay? By the look of those marvelous hips, I feel like she would be. That doesn't strike me as the crassest thing you can say about somebody, but apparently it's enough to make Rora blush. Mazana keeps poking Rora a bit, and we learn that apparently they've been to orgies together. And yeah, that's how you know you have a true friend. You go to orgies together. I don't know, I mean, it's clearly not for me, so maybe I should refrain from judgment, but it does feel a bit forced, like, oh, look how liberated and sexually free we are. You know, you can be liberated and sex positive without hanging out at orgies. That works just fine. Rora lets her friends know that nothing has happened between her and Gwen yet. But within Rora's head, you also learn that she wants everybody to think that Gwen and her are together, so everybody considers Gwen off limits. Even though I don't see how this would work in this setting. Because we've just learned that they're happy to go to orgies together, yet suddenly you want to be in a monogamous relationship with this person. Or at least you want everybody to think that you are. That seems out of character both for Gwen and Rora at this point. Nothing they've done so far makes me think like, oh yeah, we are exclusive. Or want to be exclusive. We learn more about Rora's plan of seducing Gwen which is an odd approach because she hadn't talked to Gwen in a whole week and Gwen had to force her way into her room to even get any kind of conversation going. That's not the way how you seduce somebody, just by ignoring them full stop and refusing to talk to them when they come to you. That's not how that works, I don't think. So the guy, Gaius, that Mezzana is making out with, makes it known that he wouldn't mind sleeping with Gwen either, but that it gets him, a checkup on his implants after hours or just in general, I think. This is why Rora is now getting a bit miffed and wants to tell people that Gwen is off limits to everybody. But Gaius challenges that with well, half the union takes multiple partners these days. And this is the point where Mezzana seems to get a bit jealous. She goes, "Hold up," Mezzana turned on Gaius. "What am I, chopped liver?" Leaning forward, Gaius wrapped an arm around Mezzana. "Who said I didn't take multiple partners too, babe? You know you're my number one." Rora exhaled, thankful Mezzana was the jealous type. So the woman that has just told us that they all hang out at orgies together and where everybody seems to have several partners is suddenly the jealous type? That doesn't really fit together, does it? It's like, if you take your partner to an orgy and you're both boning whoever, then she's clearly not the jealous type, is she? Rora does wonder why she hesitated to ask Gwen to stay over after she tried to fix her hand. But she established that she thinks that holding off would maybe make Gwen more interested in her. But now she notices, oh no, virtually everybody here is willing to sleep with Gwen. So, I better rethink my strategy. It's like, wow, I would barely call that a strategy, Rora, but okay. Of course, Aberkan and his homophobic incels turn back up and pick a fight with Rora to some degree. And Rora challenges him with "Are you going to kill me like you did to Arthur and the others?" Rora snapped, "I'm sure the Watchmen would love to hear that story." Yeah, but did he? I mean, even if he pushed them, then I don't even think he was on the wall for long enough to wait for anybody to then push them in the water. So he may have killed them, or he may have not. Maybe they jumped themselves, hoping for the best, and their implants is what ultimately killed them. So, while I can totally see how he would be willing to do this, and why Rora thinks that he could be guilty of this, I haven't seen any actual evidence that he killed anybody so far. As a side note, we learn that Rora doesn't really want to pick more of a fight, especially since he had a large following of performers who worshipped at his feet. Why? This seems like a very liberal society with this person's bisexual, there are orgies happening over there, we have multiple partners, so they seem very liberal. So why would anybody in the society pick the guy who uses homophobic slurs to follow? I don't get it. Also, he has done nothing so far that would inspire loyalty from anybody else. I'm not sure why people would follow this guy. Rora gets her timing wrong here. Losing all sense of self-preservation, she pointed to Nathaniel. While we added, perhaps we should talk about the first competition and how I saved your fuck's life while you were off killing people. Yeah, but you saved him in those tubes, which was after the water, so we didn't see any corpses after, did we? So yeah, so Rora has just decided Aberkan did the killing in the first competition, whether that's accurate or not, and she's gonna stick with it. Despite knowing better, Rora loses her patience completely with Aberkan and just tells him that she had to save Faniel, and yeah, she just vents her anger at Aberkan and he lets it go. Kind of like he doesn't really rise to the challenge. He tells her that he will ignore her disrespect for the moment because she saved one of his guys. But obviously he's not done being a dick. "Where are my manners?" He kneeled, placing hands on his knees as though he spoke to a very small, very foolish child. to thank you for saving Faniel's life. I won't break your neck tonight, little bird, for showing me disrespect. But make no mistake. Leaning forward, he whispered the next words into her ear. By taking Gwendolyn from me, you've earned yourself more than an enemy. First off, what's more than an enemy? Nemesis? Is that one step up from an enemy? And how was he not an enemy before? Because I think that's been established in the first competition, or possibly no, even before that, really. And then the whole idea of like, you took Gwendolyn from me. Like, first off, she is not an object. She cannot be taken from you in any shape or form because you don't own her. Even if you were dating, which you aren't, so wow, what a dick. Yeah, but towards the end, Roar makes an important discovery. Clearly, Abrakan and several others think that Gwen and her are an item. And that's exactly what she was hoping for. I would not call this an important discovery, and nor do I see why it would keep anybody from pursuing Gwen if they were actually interested. Because so far, nobody seems to be shy about making their intentions known. Why would it stop here just because you seem to be a couple? No, I think for this it actually had to be Gwen saying, now I'm one girl person, I'm only dating this one girl. Everybody else can fuck off. So yeah, just this important discovery is probably not gonna hold people off from making advances on Gwen. So while it's great that everybody is so liberal and that both polyamorous and queer relationships are portrayed as normal and a given in this, I'm not really on board with the, hey, we're all going to orgies together, because not being straight automatically means that you have to be this liberal or into all of these things. It's like, no, we don't have to be, thank you. Sorry, it's just the idea of like a room full of people boning. It's like, that is doing absolutely nothing for me. But it seems to be doing something for a whole lot of characters in this book, and I don't know. I wouldn't have minded just seeing one queer couple, just a couple who's not sleeping with everybody else as well. But maybe it's still to come. Chapter 14 starts off with Gwen walking around the palace and seeing Bastion sitting out in like the inner courtyard reading. And her thoughts on it are, hey, how are you? Still traumatized as fuck from slicing apart perfectly healthy cyborgs? Me too. Didn't she say she hated him the last time we were in her head? But now she seems to be okay with him again because suddenly she considers him an ally instead of somebody who's possibly involved in actually making her do this? Maybe I'm remembering this wrong, but I feel like she was very much not on board with him in any shape or form last time we saw a chapter from her perspective. And now she seems to be vaguely interested in whatever he's up to. Bastion shows her his prized possession, if you will. There's a rose bush with a single rose blooming in the courtyard, which is apparently the only blossom that ever turned up on this rose bush. And I mean, I'm no botanist, but is that actually how rose bushes work? Like if it's a proper bush and you only get a single blossom on there? Ever? We have a big rose bush in the garden that we leave completely alone. Like literally all I do is cut this back every once in a while so it doesn't pull itself out of the ground by getting too heavy on one side. And that blooms like crazy. So I do wonder, maybe all of the care that he is putting into this rose bush, or whatever he's having the servants do while he is out, may be the wrong care for a rose bush? But it's a wild guess. We learned something rather concerning about the world in general. So apparently industrialization has taken hold on many, many planets, and hundreds of factories had been built in years, and the resulting pollution had killed many of the pollinating insects. Cool, but if you do that on several planets, then you're also out of food because nothing is left to grow. Yeah, I mean, way to kill yourself on several planets, not just one, like we're doing. But apparently the interstellar travel is more important than keeping any environment alive. Except you will eventually run out of planets where you find stuff that you can actually eat. And of course Gwen acts like a child in a museum and wants to touch the rose, and Bastion is like, hands off, I would appreciate if you don't disturb the flower. Gwen and Bastion bond a little bit over talking about the traumatic surgeries that they had to perform. But Bastion makes it clear that he has larger things in mind. But I've come to terms with a single fact. For the circus to survive in the Crescent Star system, hurting the few to save the many is a necessary evil. Oh, we could get into the philosophy of this, and that's a rabbit hole to go down to, but not here, not now. But Gwen is not on board with it, which I actually think is okay. But she's currently only worried about the performers and how many acts would get eliminated or hurt during this, but I think Bastion is actually talking about more than just the circus. But we'll have to wait and see. And then I really don't get Gwen. Like, she asks him to stop the competition. Of course he can't. So then she asks for access to books because all of her reference guides are outdated by at least 10 years. And he agrees. He tells her to follow him. And she does so and notices, are we headed to his chambers? I don't know, castle seems to be pretty damn big if you can host 300 performers plus supporting staff of sorts. And why do you even know where his chambers are? If he's the ringleader, then he's probably not like on the ground floor where people traipse past all day. But whatever, Gwen thinks they're headed to his chambers. And then the next thought that pops into her head is, tell me that's not how he gets women into bed. Really, from your conversation before you go straight to this, can you not think about boning for like 1 second maybe? So they get to his chambers, stand in front of the door, and they still have watchmen behind them. I think they are following Gwen around non-stop, or possibly Bastion has his own watchman on him as well, I don't know. But they've been followed to his chambers. And the obvious solution is that he kisses her. I mean, okay, making the watchman think it's like, yeah, we're here to bone. You can, step away or you don't need to watch this. That's okay, I guess. Fair enough. And while Gwen's first instinct is to slap him, no, her thoughts instantly dissolve as his lips move across hers and her heartbeat speeds up and she's just like, ooh, swooning or whatever. And pfft. I would have to combine all of those smells to figure this one out, but he smelled of sage, shoe polish, and peppermint. Didn't think shoe polish was a smell that did it for anybody. Not in combination with peppermint, but whatever. Whatever floats your boat. It's like Gwen is so freaking horny. She couldn't help herself. She gaped, chest heaving as though she'd been running from the feds. Yeah, because Gwen is so in need of a lay that, just this guy who she doesn't even really like and that she's not sure she can trust in any way, kisses her and, I just have to go with it. I can't do anything else. It's like, sure. Some common sense kicks in and she is not okay with just being jumped like that. But instead of like slapping him or pushing him away or anything, she goes for a vice grip around his balls because that's clearly the next step. Anyway, despite the grip around his balls, Bastion manages to get both of them into the room and close the door. Now to escape the watchman, because clearly getting to his chambers was just, a roundabout way to going where they actually wanted to go. So Bastion points her to the window, gets a rope out of his cupboard and gets ready to leave his room again. And then Gwen makes some assumptions that are just so wild. Like, Bastion literally just tied a rope so they could climb out of the window. And she goes, care to explain what the hell is going on? She demanded, is assaulting women how you get off? Or maybe it's climbing out of windows that gets him off because that's what he's currently doing. It's really just such a weird assumption. Could he have said something before or whispered something before to let her in on the plan? Yes, that would have made a lot more sense. But Gwen doesn't seem to be applying logic here either. Bastian literally has to point her to the door to inform her, look, the watchmen are listening. She's like, oh yeah, of fucking course. Oh really, is it so obvious? Because he certainly didn't act like it was. Okay, but the watchmen are outside the door, yet those two can hear some shuffling as if somebody was moving closer to the door to listen in. So as far as I can tell, there is no peephole or anything, so there's no way for the watchmen to actually see what's going on, so all they have is audio. And the solution for Bastian and Gwen is obviously to start making out again, except they are only kissing at this point. And yet they expect to make enough noise to throw the watchmen off that are outside. Wouldn't it have been far more effective to not make out and just make the bed squeak or jump around on the bed? That seems like a fairly obvious solution to me, but now the book wants them to make out. So horny Gwen gets some more action. But instead of just keeping it to like this kiss then at least, which still doesn't make any sense to me, but at least instead of just keeping it to that, she starts fondling him all over as well, and he's like, wow, Gwen, wow. For somebody who was angry at this guy like 30 seconds ago, you're certainly way too much into this. At least there is some self-awareness in Gwen. It really had been too long since she'd betted a man, or anyone for that matter. Yeah, we can tell, Gwen, we can tell. Yeah, so all they've done for now is like kiss and fondle each other a bit, so I fail to see how this was loud enough to inform the watchmen outside what they were actually doing. Once again, just make the bed squeak, far more effective. Anyway, they both climb out of this window and enter back in the garden, where they started talking in the first place. It does make me wonder, even if this is an inner courtyard, or even if it's outside and it's daytime, wouldn't those windows or this garden be visible from several areas in the palace? I can just imagine that people are randomly walking somewhere to go practice or whatever. It's like, oh, there, Bastian climbing out of the window again. Wonder where he's going this time. I don't know, it doesn't seem like the stealthiest way to go places, maybe? Or at least it strikes me as a place or a way that would have been noticed by somebody in the castle already. Anyway, they go on a longer walk within the castle and he leads her to a large basement hall, which turns out to be a library. Like a proper library with all the things that Gwen needs, because they both started digging, trying to find the books that she could actually use. Is the basement really the best place for a library? I mean, you probably don't want direct sunlight on those books. So far, so good. But also, depending on where this castle is, basements get to be damp, or tend to be a bit damp, or possibly get flooded at the first opportunity. I don't know. But I don't know, that's not where I would put my library. You probably want some natural light for actual reading purposes, in corners at least. But yeah, okay, this is... Who cares how this castle is built? It has a massive library and Gwen now has access to at least some of the books. I'm certainly glad that Gwen has something to distract herself from how horny she is. She really needed it. It's been established that Bastian is not actually purely evil at the very least, or he's trying to help in some way. Even though it had a bit of bad fan fiction flair about it, a bit like, oh, I really want those two characters to make out, but there is no good reason for them to do so, so we'll just go with this, and meh. Not really. You could have just as well stuck them into like a party game of truth or dare, or 7 Minutes in Heaven, or whatever else all of those games are called in English. Yeah, so it didn't really strike me as the adult thing to do in any way. Which brings me to another point. There is more about the world building that doesn't make perfect sense to me, or much sense at all. And combined with those last two chapters, where it was all about banter and steamy scenes and getting those two characters to make out, whether that makes sense or not, it does make me wonder, If somebody actually wants to write steamy romance, then go and write steamy romance. You don't need all of the world building of sci-fi or steampunk to justify writing that book that you want to write. Ignore all of those people who tell you that romance is like second class literature or whatever. If you enjoy romance, if you want to write romance, steamy or otherwise, go do it. Fuck everybody else. Because this is the impression I got from at least this last chapter. What the author really wanted to write was those scenes, the action between those two characters. And it's like, yeah, why don't you just write that book instead of bothering with all of the world building that is not adding to this, and which also leaves the reader with so many questions. Because I would find the world building quite interesting, especially now that dragons have been mentioned again, but we don't actually get to see any of that. Yeah. Still many questions left unanswered. Not necessarily questions the book wants you to ask, I don't think. Oh well. Like and subscribe if you want to help this channel out, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll be back next week with another video. Bye guys!